You know, it would be interesting if just to explain, because it's, I think for a lot of people, unfortunately, don't know a lot about the Institute for War and Peace Reporting and how it operates. It seems to get, I remember when I was a bureau chief in Baghdad, they seem to have great stuff. You know, they used to rely on local people to get great stuff. What, I think it would be helpful to just talk about what it does and
Sure.
who it's for.
The reason that lots of people doesn't know about that is that actually IWPR is a media development organization. We are not news agencies. So we are working on foundation. We are working on promoting or improving independent media in the countries that we are working in, and working with journalists in a group or maybe just individually to improve the journalism standard in these countries. The way that we are working in the Iran program in IWPR now is that because of the repeated closure of the media organizations in Iran and the detention of journalists, this badly affected the independent media in the country. Two things are more important. One is that the no media organization in Iran became like enterprise organization. And another factor is that most of the seasoned journalists in Iran left the country, they are arrested, or they just quit the profession because of the situation. So the crisis is that there is no accumulation of the experience to transfer to the new generation of journalists. And that's why in IWPR, our strategy for media development in Iran is to conduct online training programs. And as you may know, no international organization can have office in Iran to do it as like workshop or this kind of things. So we, all these training programs conduct online with the restrictions that all online courses can have in Iran. And but the challenge with working with Iranian journalists now is that how you can convince them that they, though most of them are working like advocacy media, but even with advocacy media, we have good advocacy and bad advocacy. And how advocacy media is different from being activist. As a journalist, they need to provide fair, accurate, and thorough.
Could you give an example of what's good advocacy journalism and what's bad?
Yeah, when, for example, when you are working, I remember that when I work in Zanan magazine, at that time that I was in Iran, we work on women's issues in Iran. Obviously, it was advocacy media, but what was that narrow line between being an activist and being a journalist when you are working as a journalist in women in Zanan magazine was that you have to provide all aspects of the event for your reader. For example, if there is an issue in divorce for women, you have to provide the issues, the problems from men perspective. You go to the court, you interview with the woman who have the problem with her husband. But you cannot just stay there. You have to go and have another interview with the husband to see what is the dynamic of the problem. And then you can give the reader enough data, enough sources, enough understanding of the issue which is present in that event. So by good advocacy media, I mean that you have to be comprehensive. You cannot just report half of the truth. just because you are advocating for a cause. It doesn't matter how much your heart with a cause. When you are a journalist, you have a task, you have a responsibility. You are obliged to report the truth, to investigate, to provide data, sources.
I don't think it's just local journalists in authoritarian states that are under this pressure and get a little bit carried away with their own advocacy. Even, for example, in Egypt, we saw, in Tunisia, where I was covering the uprising there, we were very cautious about the terms that we were using and so on. We didn't even call it a revolution. We called it an uprising, overthrow of the Ben Ali regime, etc. But you could see in the mainstream media, on CNN, even especially Al Jazeera English, as the reporters were huddled together in Tahrir Square, basically embedded with the protesters, getting beaten in the same way as the protesters. And also in Iran during the uprising there in 2009, you could see the journalists kind of losing perspective a little bit, and all of a sudden in Egypt it became the pro-democracy protesters. Well, is it really pro-democracy? Some people say they want pro-democracy. We don't know it's a loaded term. And then Egypt became a revolution, because why was Egypt a revolution and Tunisia an overthrow? I asked my editors that question. It's because we have the camera fixed on Tahrir Square, and everyone is very excited. So it's the structure of the story.
Yes.
It's the structure of the society, the security apparatus. It huddles the journalists. It makes them part of the one faction, essentially, by necessity, by survival.